In the blistering summer of 2013, Jackson, Mississippi, was a place where tradition and faith intertwined, with nowhere embodying this more than the Behaven community. At the heart of this neighborhood stood Pastor Samuel Bennett, a man who had spent over 2 decades building his reputation as a beacon of morality and spiritual guidance. At 46, Pastor Bennett was known for his powerful sermons that could touch even the hardest of hearts. His church, Mount Zion Baptist, was more than just a house of worship, it was a cornerstone of the community, drawing hundreds of congregants every Sunday. Pastor Bennett's life appeared fulfilling. He lived in a grand house just blocks from the church with his wife, Grace, a woman of serene demeanor and unwavering faith. Together, they had raised 2 teenagers who were the pride of the Bennett family. To his congregation, Samuel was more than just a pastor. He was a symbol of what it meant to be a God-fearing man, disciplined, compassionate, and above all, blameless. Yet, behind the closed doors of his office, Samuel Bennett wrestled with demons that few could imagine. The pressures of leadership, the weight of expectations, and the monotony of life under public scrutiny began to weigh heavily on him. It was during this internal struggle that Jordan Mitchell entered his life. Jordan, a 23-year-old college student new to Jackson, was handsome, charismatic, and full of life, quickly capturing the attention of many in the congregation, including Pastor Bennett. He began attending Mount Zion Baptist regularly, immersing himself in various church activities. Eager to learn, he often lingered after services to discuss the day's sermon with Pastor Bennett or seek advice on personal matters. What began as routine pastoral care quickly blossomed into something more. Samuel found himself drawn to Jordan in ways he struggled to comprehend, let alone accept. Meanwhile, Jordan admired Samuel's wisdom and authority, sensing something deeper beneath the pastor's controlled exterior. Their meetings grew increasingly frequent, often lasting late into the night after the church had emptied. In these sessions, a bond formed that transcended the typical pastor-congregant relationship. Samuel began to confide in Jordan, sharing thoughts and feelings he had never revealed to anyone, even Grace. Jordan, in turn, opened up about his own struggles, uncertainties about the future, complicated relationships, and his deep need for acceptance. As the weeks passed, the nature of their relationship subtly but undeniably shifted. There were lingering touches, gazes that lingered just a moment too long, and an escalating tension that neither could ignore. The line between spiritual guidance and personal desire began to blur, and both men found themselves ensnared in a web of forbidden emotions. Pastor Bennett was acutely aware of the dangers. He knew that what was developing between him and Jordan was not just morally wrong, but could also destroy everything he had worked so hard to build. Yet the allure of the forbidden was too powerful to resist. In Jordan, he saw a chance to escape the confines of his life, to feel the passion that had long faded from his marriage. By the end of summer, what had started as innocent guidance had spiraled into a passionate emotional and physical affair. The 2 men met secretly, concealing their relationship from prying eyes in the community, and, most importantly, from Grace. Each encounter was filled with tension and excitement, a dangerous dance on the edge of ruin. Pastor Bennett knew he was playing with fire, but he convinced himself that he could manage the situation, that he could have both his public life and his private desires. Little did he realize that the seeds of his downfall had already been sown, and it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down around him. By fall 2013, the affair between Pastor Samuel Bennett and Jordan Mitchell had deepened into a dangerous and intoxicating secret. Their relationship, forged in the shadows, sharply contrasted with the pastor's public life, where he continued to present himself as a paragon of virtue. The thrill of the forbidden only heightened the intensity of their connection, but it also amplified the risks they were taking. They navigated their affair with extreme caution, fully aware of the disastrous consequences that would follow if their secret were exposed. They often met late at night in remote locations around Jackson, Mississippi, places where they were unlikely to be recognized. One of their favorite meeting spots was a quiet park on the outskirts of town, where they would sit in Samuel's car, speaking in hushed tones, their hands occasionally brushing against each other, sending electric jolts between them. These moments were a blend of anxiety and desire, each encounter a calculated risk that thrilled and terrified them both. Samuel was acutely aware of the facade he maintained in his life. By day, he stood at the pulpit, delivering sermons on morality, loyalty, and the dangers of temptation. Yet by night, he succumbed to those very temptations, unable to resist the pull he felt toward Jordan. This internal conflict gnawed at him, but the passion he experienced in Jordan's presence was something he hadn't felt in years. It was an escape from the pressures of his public life, a release from the burdens placed upon him as a spiritual leader. Their affair was more than mere physical attraction, it was a tangled web of emotions. Samuel found a listener in Jordan, someone with whom he could share his doubts and fears, someone who didn't see him as the untouchable figure his congregation did. Conversely, Jordan was captivated by the power and authority Samuel held. Being involved with someone so prominent made him feel significant, even invincible. Yet, as their relationship deepened, so did Jordan's resentment. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being used, that Samuel's interest in him was purely self-serving, a way to satisfy his desires while maintaining a carefully crafted image. Despite the escalating tension, neither was willing to end their relationship. Samuel feared the emptiness that would return if he cut ties with Jordan, while Jordan relished the status and influence that came from being close to such a powerful figure. Their meetings continued, each one more dangerous as they grew increasingly difficult to conceal. As winter approached, the pressure on Samuel intensified. The burden of his dual life became unbearable, and the fear of discovery gnawed at him. He knew that if this secret were revealed, not only would his career be shattered, but so would his family and reputation. However, the thought of letting go of Jordan was equally irresistible. This affair had become an addiction, a compulsion he couldn't halt despite the risks involved. Jordan, too, felt the weight of the tension. The initial excitement of their relationship was fading, replaced by a growing bitterness. He felt trapped in a situation where he had little power, dependent on the whims of a man who preached virtue by day yet surrendered to sin by night. The imbalance in their relationship became increasingly evident with each passing day, and Jordan's resentment simmered, ready to boil over. Their clandestine affair spiraled out of control, both men aware they were playing with fire. The line between love and manipulation began to blur, and the stakes rose higher with every secret meeting. As the days grew shorter and the nights colder, Samuel and Jordan found themselves on the brink of an incomprehensible disaster. What had initially been an exhilarating escape now threatened to become a catastrophe that could obliterate their entire worlds. By early 2014, the carefully concealed affair between Pastor Samuel Bennett and Jordan Mitchell took a dangerous turn when an anonymous tip landed on the desk of Deacon Harold Thompson, one of the most trusted leaders at Greater Faith Baptist Church. The typed, unsigned note was brief yet devastating. "Your pastor is not the man you think he is. He is involved in a relationship that will destroy this church if the truth is revealed." At first, Deacon Thompson dismissed the tip as baseless rumor. Pastor Bennett had been a guiding force for the church for years, and the notion that he could be involved in something scandalous seemed ludicrous. However, the disturbing nature of the allegations lingered in his mind, and Thompson, a man known for his thoroughness, felt compelled to investigate further. He began his inquiry discreetly, careful not to raise any suspicions. He started by reviewing phone records he had quietly obtained through a contact at the local phone company. What he discovered shocked him: numerous late-night calls between Pastor Bennett and a number registered to Jordan Mitchell, a young man who had recently joined the congregation. The frequency and timing of these calls raised alarms, as they occurred well after midnight, long after church matters typically wrapped up. Concerned but still uncertain, Thompson decided to dig deeper. He began to observe the pastor more closely, noting his comings and goings. Thompson's worst fears were soon confirmed. One night he followed Bennett unnoticed and was appalled to see the pastor meeting Jordan Mitchell in a secluded parking lot far from the church. Thompson's heart shattered as he witnessed the two men embrace an interaction far too intimate to be considered innocent. He continued his surveillance over the following weeks, gathering more evidence: photos of their secret meetings, hotel stay records matching the pastor's unexplained absences, and testimonies from several church members who had noticed Samuel and Jordan's suspicious behavior. The deacon's discovery sent shockwaves through him. As a man deeply committed to his faith and the well-being of his church, Thompson felt torn between his loyalty to his pastor and the undeniable truth of what he had uncovered. The weight of the situation pressed heavily on him, knowing that if this affair came to light, it could destroy the church, shatter the congregation's trust, and potentially lead to a mass exodus of members. Thompson contemplated confronting Pastor Bennett directly, hoping to address the issue quietly and perhaps guide the pastor back to the right path. However, as he wrestled with his conscience, rumors within the church began to spread. Whispers about the pastor's inappropriate behavior circulated among church leaders, fueled by subtle changes in Pastor Bennett's demeanor and the growing distance between him and his wife, who was starting to sense that something was wrong. The situation became more urgent with each passing day. Deacon Thompson knew he couldn't hide the truth forever, but he was also afraid of the repercussions that could arise from exposing such a scandal. The reputation of Greater Faith Baptist Church, built over decades, now hung by a thread. As Thompson continued to ponder his next move, the tension within the church community escalated, setting the stage for a confrontation that would soon shake their faith to its very core. By mid-2014, the previously secret affair between Pastor Samuel Bennett and Jordan Mitchell had become a ticking time bomb, ready to explode at any moment. Jordan, increasingly frustrated and filled with resentment, was growing tired of the secrecy. He felt abandoned by the pastor, who seemed more concerned with his public image than with the promises made during their most intimate moments. The power dynamic in their relationship shifted. Jordan was no longer content to remain in the shadows, invisible to the world. A turning point came one night when Jordan, after weeks of reflecting on his situation, made a crucial decision. He confronted Pastor Bennett after one of their late-night meetings on the outskirts of Jackson. Jordan's demeanor was different. He was no longer the hesitant young man seeking guidance, but someone hardened by betrayal. He delivered an ultimatum. The pastor had to acknowledge their relationship openly, or Jordan would expose everything himself. The threat of revelation struck fear into Pastor Bennett. His entire life was built on the foundations of faith, family, and reputation within the community. The thought of losing it all, his wife, his children, and the church he had led for years, was utterly unbearable. Pastor Bennett tried to persuade Jordan, pleading for more time and understanding, but Jordan's patience had worn thin. His demands were clear. He wanted money, and he wanted it now. He named a sum that would financially devastate Bennett, but the pastor saw no other option. Reluctantly, Pastor Bennett agreed to the extortion, viewing it as the only way to protect his family and his position. The first payment was made a week later, draining a significant portion of the church's emergency funds. However, Jordan was not satisfied. The initial thrill of having power over the pastor quickly faded, replaced by a growing bitterness and a desire for more money, more control, more recognition. The payments continued, deepening the chasm between the two men. What had once been a relationship fueled by passion and secrecy had now morphed into a toxic exchange of power and control. Under immense pressure, Pastor Bennett found himself increasingly cornered. The financial burden was overwhelming, forcing him to concoct excuses for the missing church funds, raising suspicions among the church treasurer and deacons. The situation spiraled further out of control as Jordan's demands grew more erratic. He began contacting Pastor Bennett at all hours, showing up uninvited in places where the pastor couldn't risk being seen with him. Stress and fear became evident in Samuel. He lost weight. His hair began thinning, and dark circles appeared under his eyes. His once passionate sermons turned disjointed and lifeless, tinged with a vague sense of despair that his congregation didn't fully understand but could deeply feel. At home, Pastor Bennett's already strained relationship with his wife worsened. She noticed the late nights, the unexplained absences, and the unusual withdrawals from their joint bank account. His children, who once were the light of his life, felt distant as he struggled to maintain the facade of a normal life. Meanwhile, the church community, unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface, began to sense that something was amiss. Attendance at services started to dwindle, and the once vibrant atmosphere of the church turned somber and tense. Whispers among the congregation grew louder as they speculated about what might be troubling their once inspiring leader. Trapped by his own decisions, Pastor Bennett saw no way out. The extortion had become a noose tightening around his neck, and the fear of public shame haunted him every day. As the payments continued, the pastor realized he could no longer control the situation he had created, and the weight of his choices threatened to crush him entirely. By the fall of 2014, the extortion had driven Pastor Samuel Bennett to the brink of destruction. Each passing day brought a new wave of anxiety, as Jordan Mitchell's demands became increasingly relentless, and the threat of exposure grew ever more real. Once a respected figure in Jackson, Mississippi, Pastor Bennett now lived in constant fear that his darkest secret would be revealed to the world. The pressure was suffocating, and the pastor found himself consumed by thoughts of how to escape the nightmare he had created. On the night of October 15, 2014, a fierce storm rolled through Jackson, bringing torrential rain. The thunderous lightning seemed to mirror the chaos in Samuel's mind. Desperation had taken over, and he saw no way out but to silence Jordan permanently. This decision wasn't made lightly. It was the culmination of weeks of sleepless nights and anxious calculations. Yet, as the rain hammered against the windows of his study, Pastor Bennett convinced himself that there was no other option. Jordan had become too dangerous a threat to be left unchecked. They arranged to meet in a secluded area outside of town, far from prying eyes. The location was hidden at the edge of a forest, accessible only via a narrow dirt road that had been damaged by the storm. The purpose of the meeting was to deliver the final payment, a sum Jordan believed would end their arrangement once and for all. However, Pastor Bennett had other plans. When Jordan arrived at the meeting spot, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The rain had turned the dirt path into a slick, muddy track, and the wind howled through the trees, creating a haunting backdrop for their encounter. Pastor Bennett, soaked from head to toe, waited beside his car, his mind racing with the horrific act he was about to commit. The conversation between the two men was brief and strained. Jordan, sensing something was amiss, grew anxious. He demanded his money, but Samuel hesitated, his hand trembling as he reached into his coat pocket. At that moment, something within Samuel broke. Fear, anger, and shame, all the emotions he had long suppressed, erupted in a single act of violence. In a sudden panic, Pastor Bennett struck Jordan with a heavy metal object he had hidden in his coat. The blow was swift and fatal, catching Jordan off guard. He staggered backward, but the force of the strike was lethal. Jordan fell to the ground, his body lying motionless in the mud, while the rain continued to pour. The realization of what he had just done hit Samuel like a freight train. He had killed Jordan. There was no turning back now. For a moment, the world seemed to freeze. The only sound was the rain pounding the ground, washing away the blood that began to pool around Jordan's body. Pastor Bennett stood frozen, staring at the lifeless form of the man he had once admired. The horror of his actions paralyzed him, but survival instincts soon kicked in. He knew he had to cover up this crime, erase any trace of their relationship before it was too late. In the darkness of night, with the storm as his only witness, Samuel dragged Jordan's body into the woods. The rain made the task easier, yet harder. The ground was soft, but the mud made it nearly impossible to move quickly. Pastor Bennett worked frantically, his heart racing as he dug a shallow grave beneath the roots of a large oak tree. He buried Jordan's body, hoping the rain would wash away any evidence of his crime. With trembling hands, he gathered Jordan's belongings, including his phone, which contained incriminating evidence of their relationship. He deleted all traces of their communications before smashing the phone with a rock and burying it beside Jordan's body. Then the pastor returned to his car, his body covered in mud and soaked to the bone. His mind was filled with panic and disbelief as he drove away from the scene, the storm still raging around him. However, covering up the murder did little to silence the guilt that now consumed him. Cracks in Pastor Bennett's carefully maintained facade began to show soon after. He returned home, trying to maintain his composure, but the weight of what he had done was unbearable. The guilt gnawed at every thought. He began to withdraw further. His once charismatic presence at the pulpit was now just a shadow of his former self. The church community noticed the change in their pastor, but no one could guess the real reason behind his decline. Pastor Samuel Bennett, once a respected man, had become a murderer, burdened by the knowledge that the truth would eventually come to light. Jordan Mitchell's sudden disappearance on that stormy night in October 2014 did not go unnoticed. His family, worried after losing contact, reported him missing within days. Jordan had always been close to his mother, regularly communicating with her even when he was out of town. When calls and messages suddenly stopped, his mother's concern quickly turned to fear. The Jackson Police Department responded swiftly, launching a missing persons investigation that would later uncover one of the most shocking scandals in the city's history. Detective Lisa Morgan, an experienced investigator with over 15 years in law enforcement, was assigned to the case. She approached Jordan's disappearance with methodical precision. Her first step was to investigate Jordan's recent activities, his friendships, his work, and any potential relationships that might provide clues. Before long, she uncovered Jordan's involvement with Pastor Samuel Bennett. Initially, the connection between Jordan and the pastor was just a small thread in a larger tapestry of the investigation. However, that relationship quickly became the focal point. Detective Morgan obtained Jordan's phone records, revealing a series of text messages between him and Pastor Bennett. Although carefully crafted, the messages hinted at a far more personal relationship than one would expect between a pastor and a congregant. The tone of the messages suggested intimacy, and the frequency of their late-night conversations raised suspicions. As Detective Morgan delved deeper, she began interviewing congregation members, including those who had seen Jordan and Pastor Bennett together. Witnesses spoke of secret meetings, whispered conversations, and the visible tension between the two men. A church deacon, who had secretly been conducting his own investigation after receiving an anonymous tip, ultimately shared what he knew with the detective. His findings, although not complete, reinforced the suspicion that Pastor Bennett and Jordan Mitchell were involved in an illicit relationship. The investigation reached a crucial point when Detective Morgan traced a series of financial transactions from Pastor Bennett's personal account to an account under Jordan's name. The payments were substantial and irregular, coinciding with the period when the extortion threats began. This financial evidence provided a clear motive, indicating that the pastor was paying to keep their relationship hidden. By November 2014, mounting evidence pointed to Pastor Bennett as the prime suspect in Jordan's disappearance. Detective Morgan knew she needed more than just circumstantial evidence to make an arrest, so she continued to press, re-interviewing witnesses and combing through the pastor's digital trail. In her investigation, she discovered more text messages, this time from a second phone used by Jordan to communicate with Pastor Bennett. These messages were explicit, detailing not only their relationship but also the escalating tension as Jordan pressed Bennett for more money. The texts portrayed a man feeling trapped and desperate, while the other man lost control of the situation. With evidence in hand, Detective Morgan obtained a search warrant for the pastor's home and office. The search yielded further incriminating evidence, including a journal in which Pastor Bennett wrote about his guilt and fear of losing everything. These writings, although vague, hinted at desperate actions taken and spoke of a burden too heavy to bear. The arrest of Pastor Samuel Bennett on December 2, 2014, shocked the community. News of his involvement in Jordan Mitchell's disappearance and the preceding affair dominated local headlines. Media swarmed the courthouse as Bennett was taken into custody, his face reflecting a mix of regret and fear. The community that once revered him now faced disbelief and betrayal. How could their spiritual leader, someone they trusted to guide their souls, commit such a monumental deceit? The church, once a sanctuary, became the epicenter of a scandal that shook Jackson to its core. As Pastor Bennett sat in his jail cell awaiting the impending charges against him, his double life began to unravel completely. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and the undeniable truth was that the man who preached about truth and virtue lived in a lie that had cost an innocent man's life. The investigation, while not over, had unearthed dark secrets that Pastor Bennett had desperately tried to hide. Now, with mounting legal pressure on his shoulders, the pastor would have to face the consequences of his actions in court, with the entire community watching him closely. Pastor Samuel Bennett's trial began on February 16, 2015, at the Hinds County Courthouse in Jackson, Mississippi. The case garnered national attention, with media from across the country descending upon the small southern town to cover the proceedings. The courtroom was filled with spectators, including Bennett's congregation members, curious onlookers, and journalists eager to report every detail of the case. The trial was expected to be one of the most sensational in recent Mississippi history, given the high-profile nature of the defendant and the shocking charges against him. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Karen Jackson, presented a meticulously detailed case against Pastor Bennett. Jackson, known for her tough approach and sharp intellect, outlined the evidence in her opening statement, describing the dark relationship between Bennett and Jordan Mitchell as the catalyst for a series of events leading to murder. After reading testimonies and evidence, the prosecution successfully demonstrated that Pastor Samuel Bennett, once respected and considered a role model, had a dark side that shattered many lives. Several witnesses, including Jordan's family, testified about the drastic changes in Jordan's behavior after becoming involved with Bennett. A key testimony came from Detective Lisa Morgan, who laid out the timeline of events leading up to Jordan's disappearance and ultimately Bennett's arrest. The investigation revealed that Bennett, in a state of panic, killed Jordan to cover up a threat that could tarnish his reputation. Although defense attorney Richard Malone attempted to frame the case as an act of self-defense, the lack of supporting evidence undermined that argument. Instead, testimonies from church members revealing Bennett's increasingly unstable behavior before the murder only strengthened the prosecution's case. Throughout the trial, Bennett sat silently, almost unresponsive, while his wife could only cry as she listened to the shocking facts of her husband's double life. On March 10, 2015, after 3 weeks of trial, the jury took only 5 hours to decide that Bennett was guilty of first-degree murder. Bennett was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, marking that he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. The case shook the local community, resulting in a rift within the church that Bennett once led. The congregation's trust in their leader, and even in religion itself, was shaken by the scandal. Pastor Bennett's story became a tragic warning of how power, secrets, and uncontrolled passions can lead to inevitable ruin.